So, here's the deal. There's a lot of people who don't recognize that the Federal Reserve is a Federal Reserve Corporation, a private for-profit corporation operating in the United States, given by Congress, because they twisted the arm of Congress severely, the exclusive right to print the U.S. currency and to regulate the interest rates, and also that the general public, citizens of the United States, would be responsible in case the U.S. defaulted on its debt, which means that when the government wants to have more money, borrow it, they have to ask the Federal Reserve Corporation to give them credits, because, of course, the Federal Reserve has no reserves of any kind, but it is called that to mislead the public, and it's done a good job with that. The Interbank people tried to block the publication of a book that exposed them recently, and the judge overturned that and allowed publication of the book. Do you know the name of the publication? Why is that? Anyway, so when the U.S. federal government wants to borrow some money, they have to ask the federal corp and the Federal Reserve is quite happy to oblige, because this is what they got the charter for their corporation to function in the United States. And so they just simply print up more U.S. dollar credits, and send it over by email or however. And then what happens? Well, the U.S. government sends it out in $1,200 checks or whatever, the trillions that they've just borrowed, quote, borrowed, given credits. And then what happens is the Federal Reserve charges them interest on those credits. Right. No money transferred. Just a few electronic credits created out of nothing. And then the Federal Reserve Corporation charges them interest on that. I mean, what kind of a bogus scam is that? And it's legal according to Congress. Why doesn't the general public know about this? Now, the mission statement of the Interbank people, of which the Federal Reserve Corporation is basically a branch office in the United States, the Interbank people, composed of the big banks, Bank of England, Deutsche Bank, and a couple of others that were started by the sons of the original Rothschilds. This is what they do, is they go into a country, and as they say, they don't care about the politics or religion or anything about the country. All they want to do is to force that government to give them the exclusive right to print the currency, charge the interest rates arbitrarily, and the citizens will become liable for the debt in case the government defaults. Well, what this allows the Federal Reserve or one of these branch offices to do is to regulate the interest rates up and down, and they have done it in the United States 4 times now, and this is what happens. They put the interest rates near zero. The particular market, and the liquidity increases, and the money becomes very available, and people start borrowing money. Okay, and then all of a sudden, the Interbank people, the Federal Reserve, stops the quick credit, and the market crashes. And of course, they shorted the market, so they make a lot of money when it falls, picking up the pieces. Now, in the late 1800s. Federal Reserve sent out a notice 3 years ahead of time that on such and such a date to stop refinancing mortgages. Okay, now they lowered the interest rates, the market heated up, they stopped refinancing, the market crashed, they picked up a lot of property. In 1929, the Federal Reserve lowered the interest rates to zero. The stock market went crazy, as is history, as legendary now. Shoe shine boys were buying stocks and had the latest tips. The market was going nuts. The margin was only 10%. Well, on a certain day, the Federal Reserve sent out notice to the brokers to increase the margin rate to 50% because things had, quote, gotten out of hand. Well, J.P. Morgan, who had been saying all along, gee, this is a good time to invest in the market and blah, 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 blah. Of course, the market crashed. And he said, well, isn't it neat he just got out just in the nick of time? Well, of course. He worked for the Interbank people. Of course, he knew what was going to happen and when it was going to happen. He was a shill. People think the inflation and business cycles are kind of like a virus. They just come and go and nobody knows why. Well, you regulate them with the interest rates, and that's what Federal Reserve. And put the cart before the horse. Now, in 1972, Connally went to Nixon and got a fiat currency adopted, right? And on the grounds that publicly they said it would stabilize the currency. Well, 1972, stagflation hit the United States as a result. Interbank people again. 2008, they lowered the interest rates again to zero because the Federal Reserve has a sole ability to regulate the interest rate. The interest rates went to zero specifically because the Federal Reserve put it there. What happened? Everybody knows the real estate market, just like the 29 stock market. People were flipping houses, and you didn't have to verify any income. You could say anything you want. It would never be verified or checked. And at some point, the Federal Reserve said, this has gotten out of hand, and they crashed the real estate market, right? No refinancing. Everybody had to dump their properties. Prices plummeted. Of course, you understand. Interbank people pick things up cheap, pennies on the dollar. Same like they did in the Great Depression to follow the stock market crash. All right, so look where we are today. Again, 2020, July. Interest rates, zero. Again, by the Interbank people. Federal Reserve Corporation, again, stalking their prey. They're going to fleece somebody, but you don't know who yet. Wait and listen to this. Stock market's going nuts. 29,000. It was 1,072. Do you think the U.S. economy has expanded by 29 times since its height of 1968? When there was real flourishing here? No. Why is it? Why now is it so high? The interest rates are zero. And guess who? Warren Buffett. The other day gave an hour presentation of how it was a really good time to get into U.S. stocks. Aha. Sounds just like J.P. Morgan, and at the same period of time, the same economic circumstances. Do you think that Warren Buffett is nuts? Do you think he's made his wealth, or did somebody help him? Is he working for somebody? Is he helping out the Federal Reserve Corporation here for the coming fleece? And here is the virus, and people are clamoring for money. And the Federal Reserve is so happy to oblige with $3 trillion. Printed credits and charging America for money it didn't have, nor get, nor. And they're clamoring for another $3 trillion. And they're clamoring for monthly payouts of the American citizens to themselves. And Federal Reserve is so happy to oblige. It's diluting the U.S. dollar. Why are they doing this? See, they are going to crash the U.S. stock market, but there's a little bit of a twist coming. Wait and listen. And you can see they've gone into the bond market now to, quote, support the bond market. Why doesn't the American public know about that? They say, according to their own words, the Federal Reserve says, don't worry, America. We will stand by you. We have a bottomless account, quote, bottomless account. That means that they are going to dilute the U.S. dollar according to their own estimation of what they have in mind. What do they have in mind? Well, the wealth of the U.S. is gone of the government. It is long gone, right? There's no wealth left in the U.S. government. The American citizens have some, and they are going to be fleeced, again, just like the stock market. But there's something else going on. Much more important. What is it? Well, what's the deal with China? I mean, why are we getting one of their daughters of their founders, holding her in jail in Canada with no trial? What's going on with China here? This deal with this altercation, confrontation, what is going on? Well, let's look at the Interbank desires. Just as a side interest, okay. What do you suppose the Interbank people might be thinking? Well, let's look at China then, since this is going on. China's, has got their poverty alleviation program that's lifted 800 million people out of abject poverty in the last few years. And yet, the West has said, why don't you guys weaken your yen a little bit? I mean, your yuan a little bit. And China has said, look, even if it goes down to a couple of percentage points, it's going to create unemployment and really disrupt our economy. As China has said, objection to that, and they won't lower weaken their RMB, right? Well, in their Belt and Road Initiative, huge expense. They're chugging ahead, and they've got great financial reserves. The population saves 40% of its GDP, and the personal income they save some 30% of their monthly income. The central government has said it's going to refund fund the retirement accounts of all these elderly people. I mean, trillions of dollars. So it's got trillions of dollars there, actual dollars. I mean, actual, RMBs. And then the people have all these trillions of dollars, in their own savings account, right, to go into the stock market or wherever. And then, of course, this is a plum to Interbank folks, originating with the Rothschild's son, the Bank of England, the Deutsche Bank, etc. I mean, the amount of wealth in the Chinese government and in the Chinese people is extraordinary in the history of the world. Extraordinary. And the Interbank people have the greed that is unsatiable. They don't care if they murder millions as a result of their actions. They do not care. They've stated that. You can hear their tapes. Well, there's something missing. Well, by the way, yeah. China's has, the percentage of its government holdings of federal treasuries. What is it? 60, 68% or something? I don't know. It's pretty high. Well, of course, President Xi is not going to allow Interbank folks to put a one of their central banks in his country, is he? I kind of doubt it. Well, the Interbank people don't really stop at no. They don't stop at no. Even President Jackson can only keep them out for a little bit. Now you see they're here and what they're doing in the United States. The Federal Reserve, part of Interbank. So, Interbank folks, they'll start wars. They'll do anything to get a central bank in your country. So what does this mean for China with, well, look, is it starting to make sense yet? What happens, given the Chinese government is holding all these U.S. federal treasuries, what happens if the Federal Reserve dilutes the U.S. dollar to the extent that it causes hyperdeflation? Now, hyperinflation is just a smokescreen, the fact that the interbank people have diluted that particular currency of that country. What happens is when the Federal Reserve continues, as it's doing right now, to dilute the U.S. dollar to the extent that it depreciates, it's diluted so much that the banks around the world start dumping their federal treasuries. What is going to happen to the financial balance sheet of the Chinese government? That's right. Huge loss. And look at the financial needs of that country now. If the Federal Reserve dilutes the U.S. dollar, everybody's dollar around the world will go to zero, basically. It's called the silent or secret tax. And, people in this country, in the United States, they say, oh, inflation is hitting and the dollar's only worth 20% of what it used to be. How many people ask, where is the 80%? It did not evaporate. It went into the cyber Ethernet. The U.S. government borrowed dollars, went into government contracts, went into the banks like J.P. Morgan, etc., who consolidated the banking system in the United States into like 4 major banks or something at this point. And it distills back out into their bank accounts. That's where the 80% went, to various corporations because of U.S. deficit borrowing. You see? That's where it is. That's where the other 80% is. Since 1915, the U.S. dollar has now had the purchasing power of a nickel. Where did the 95% go? Right. Did not disappear. Did not disappear. It went into somebody's pocket. Who regulates the interest rates? Well, there you have it. So what's going to happen with China when given the Federal Reserve continues on its course, as it has so stated it's going to do, because of the virus, it has to do it. Right? It has to do it. It's being requested by the American public. Well, China is going to be brought to its financial knees. It's going to be brought to its financial knees, which is exactly the design of the insatiable greed of the interbank people, of which the Federal Reserve is just a corporate branch. And the the interbank people are going to go to President Xi and say, look, we have multiple trillions. Of course, they just earned it, right? They just earned it. They just got it from what they were doing, because they knew they were going to dilute the dollar. They know it all along. And of course, they're in the Forex exchange big time, so they're shorting the U.S. dollar against the Swiss franc, because the Swiss franc is their currency, the gold currency, the interbank currency. That's why it's been like it has been since the mid-1700s, is because that's where the financial power in the world is located. And they wield it with death, virtually. You will do what they say, or they will get to you one way or another. That's their greed. and they're going to get to China. Oh, they'll do it. I doubt anybody's going to step in and stop the Federal Reserve from this hyper devaluation of the U.S. dollar, but it should be done, and it's going to devastate the world economy because the hyper devaluation of the U.S. dollar is going to mean nobody in the United States has any money to import anything, and so every country around the world who relies on the U.S. importing an economy, it's just going to be a terrible devastation unless somebody does something about it. But in the event that they don't, China will have a central bank branch of the Interbank people. Either that or they will be deeply in debt, like the IMF is doing with around the world to undeveloped countries, which is also associated with Interbank people, by the way. Very beneficent organization, the IMF. Good intentions, but however, not when Interbank people gets in there. And so that's the upshot of what's happening with the Federal Reserve and the coronavirus diluting, a smokescreen to dilute at will to the extent that it wants to the U.S. dollar, to get China, to get the wealth out of China. I mean, that is Interbank people's raison d'etre. I mean, that's their mission statement. That's their corporate plan. Year-to-year profit growth. It's the same old deal, except this case it's they do countries. They don't do demographics, particular groups here and there. And China is a plum. China is a big plum, and they've been salivating over it for quite a bit of time now. So, get out of the U.S. dollar. That's all I got to say. I mean, to my friends, I don't know anybody who's going to stand up to these people